Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Symphony 101. This is part 4, Lunch In with the Maestro. And today is all about the Maestro. A very short video about being a conductor and what that means. Who is this person? This elusive person who stands in front of the orchestra, does not usually make a sound. I frankly sing the whole way through, as everyone knows, but should not really be making a sound. And by gesture and hopefully encouragement, gets a group of musicians to play. Who is this person? What is that all about? So, first of all, maestro is not a term that most modern conductors relish. It's usually thrown around with a certain amount of irony. The maestros of the past were certainly capable of being tyrannical, capable of being single-minded, not listening to their musicians. Those days, I hope, thankfully, are gone. Maestro itself just means teacher in Italian. But it's, of course, created this whole myth, this maestro myth. But like I say, today, these days, I hope that that idea has changed, become modernized, become more of a process, a collaborative process, than one person dictating everything, including people's lives, their jobs. You know, the famous stories of Toscanini firing people in rehearsal, and they had to go home and explain that to their families. So things have changed a lot, which is good. The idea of the conductor is really coming from the, I suppose, 19th century, where the conductor as a designated role started to appear. There were Kapellmeisters, of course, before that. But being in front of an orchestra, a symphony orchestra, and being responsible for all of that, the running of that programming, is really a sort of 19th century and 20th century idea. There are many early references to conductors. There's one very unfortunate individual who has gone into history for a very sad story. Although conducting can be a dangerous job, emotionally, psychologically, it's rare that you actually have casualties. There was one very famous one, though, Jean-Baptiste Lully, who in 1687 had a conducting accident and actually died. I'll explain. Back in the day, before we had these things, batons, and I'll do a little bit on that in a minute. Before we had these, and we used our arms, conductors would use a staff, hit the ground, boom, very primitive, right? Boom, there's the beat, boom, boom, boom. Lully got a bit excited. He stuck the staff into his foot. The foot and the leg went gangrenous, and he didn't want it amputated. He said he'd rather die, and in fact, that's what happened. So it was an unfortunate conducting casualty. 1687. So, modern day conducting. What's the role? Well, you'll hear two different titles attached to this person. One is the music director, and another is conductor. A music director of an organization is responsible for the programming, personnel decisions, the administrative. Is part of the administrative running of the orchestra, and is usually responsible and hired by a board of directors. They assume the role of the conductor as well, which of course is the person standing in front of the orchestra, but there's a lot more to the job. In fact, an awful lot more to the job than actually being with the musicians. So the role is, it's one of administrative oversight as well as musical oversight. Responsibilities within the orchestra. This is what we're here to talk about, right? What does the conductor do in front of an orchestra? And why does that person get all of the accolades, and why is that person the figurehead? Well, the conductor is responsible for a certain unity of purpose, a certain unified idea of what a piece of music is going to be. And how that practically works out is essentially the conductor is responsible for leading things like the tempo of the piece, the speed at which the piece goes, any variations of the tempo, slowing up or speeding up, accelerando that is, and retardando or rallentando, one pulling one way or the other. Responsible for balance. So where's the principal voice? I mean, the conductor is really responsible for understanding the piece of music, the material that that piece of music comes from. What is the impulse? Where's the line? The line usually being a melody or something else. It could be a color, but where's the line, and how do you trace that line through what all the players are doing? Because it can be a complex machine. And when composers, and here's the relationship between the conductor and the composer, when the composers write their piece and they set it down in a score, you know, in a score. This is a piece I love. This is the Bartók Concerto for Orchestra. And when the composer writes down those notes, and I'll talk about some of these markings, which are minor actually, when they write down those notes, they have a certain thing in mind, but you're getting, I'm loath to put percentages on this, but what, 80% of the information that is necessary to perform this piece. Obviously, where you perform it is very important. Acoustic is going to affect balance. It's going to affect articulation. Obviously, the dynamic, general dynamic. Those sorts of decisions are made usually by the conductor in collaboration with the players on the stage. Where are we performing this? So we perform in the music hall. Music hall has a bunch of challenges as an orchestra. It's first of all a theatre stage. It has flies on both sides and up. It's a proscenium arch, and we play behind it. These days we've actually got an acoustic shell which goes around it, which is fantastic. We have it's Portsmouth High School has very kindly allowed us to use it. Thank you, Steve Cirillo. Big shout out to you. So we have an acoustic shell which helps us project the sound into the auditorium, but it has its challenges, and we have to be aware of those idiosyncrasies of the acoustic. And the conductor is the person responsible for really making all that, making all those decisions and making that happen. Conductor is responsible for unifying articulations. Do we play short? Do we play long? Do we play with an accent? Do we not play with an accent? What do these things mean? A dot on top of a note can be any number of things. We call it staccato, but it can be any number of things, and it's really up to the conductor to have an idea, an interpretation of how to play that, and everyone else has to join on that, join that idea, right? So it's unification. As I say, balance. There are certain things that are more important than others, just like life, right? So there are certain notes that are more equal than others, and you have to give those, give that idea space. You have to be able to figure out what is important right now and what's maybe less important, what's supportive. So those sorts of decisions are what the conductor will make in time. The most important, of course, is tempo, speed. What speed is this piece going to go at? And that is determined by a few things. First of all, you do come with an idea. You come with, generally I have mapped this out in my head, and I will write down on my score a number. And this number, very simply, is a metronome marking. This is the number of beats per minute. So I have a metronome, and I click it out at 128 for the finale of this piece, which is exactly what he wrote as well. This is, you'll find in the score, you'll find, certainly in more modern pieces, 20th century composers became very specific about speed at which they wanted their pieces to go. So you'll find an expression marking here, pesante, which means heavy. So just heaviness, which is more to just the kind of weight and grinding of the music. And here you have the metronome marking. This is a quarter note, and it's going to be clicking along at 128. But look at all the other stuff that's in here as well. Of course, you've got this is a fermata, a hold, where everything stops, and it holds, and it says lungo, which means long. So how long that is, that's up to the conductor. And then you have a cialorando immediately afterwards, al presto, and then it keeps going and builds from there. So in certain pieces, 20th century pieces, 21st century pieces, you'll find in the 19th century as well, there's a lot of direction that the composer gives to the orchestra and to the conductor. And it's really up to the conductor to make sure all of that's happening and that they lead it. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to go exactly 128. You get into a different acoustic. You get into a very resonant, wet acoustic, like in a large church, and you want to play something really fast and really short. You may have to modify. You may have to think about, okay, this is going to have to go slower. Play it quieter, a little lighter, shorter. Those sorts of decisions made in the moment are to try and get to the idea that the composer is getting across. And that's one of the most important roles of the conductor, is being the composer's advocate. To have even working with contemporary composers, you get a score, you look through it, you start on a rehearsal process, the composer is usually present as part of that, and there's a questioning back and forward, and sometimes the composer will defer to the conductor and to the players and say, okay, I didn't realize, or that's, in this context, of course, that makes more sense, and it becomes a creative process at that point, not just interpretive, but it's also you're creating. So I love working with composers. I think it's really important for orchestras and musical groups to work with composers to get that sense of freshness. You know, you're in that creative process. You can actually feel the heat, you know, of creation, not just reinterpretation. And then you can, if you can remember that, you can bring that back into other parts of the repertoire. So you can go back to Beethoven with that idea of being fresh and invention. You know, how can we think of Beethoven's Eroica in a way that's new? It's such a shockingly original piece as it is, but you know, what can we bring to, imagine playing this for the first time and Beethoven being there and being angry and telling us, you know, that we're not playing properly or fast enough. But what is that experience like? And that brings me to the two-part process, really, three-part process of being a conductor. First of all, you get your score. So I'm just going to travel back to this, and I'm going to very quickly, you don't need to understand a lot of this, of what he wrote. Bartók's a complicated composer, obviously. But I'm just going to show you some of the things that I highlight. And I use a very simple technique taught to me by my teacher, Gerhard Markson, who was the principal conductor of the National Symphony Orchestra of Ireland, German conductor, opera conductor. Gerhard, wherever you are, thank you so much. Your discipline and your rigor have always resounded in my head. Gerhard conducted over 1,000 performances of Rigoletto in his life, and from memory, which is an incredible task. So anyway, Gerhard also showed me a technique for marking scores, and this is it very simply. I use red pencil for things within the score. So it tells me here, here, that's a trumpet. Sorry, that's not, it's a trombone. Excuse me. Trombone comes in here, plays that's a C sharp, I think this is a D sharp. This is a horn. This is the clarinet doing a little staccato eighth notes, which is pretty important and leads the line. That's the line. Here are my strings coming in immediately afterwards. Different tempo, I'll talk about that in a second. That means mute, so they have their mutes on. They're little things at the end of the bridge, right, of a string instrument, and you put a little rubber mute over the bridge, and it creates this muted sound. And here it is concertino, so it is muted. Here's the viola playing a line with the first violins. The first violins are actually divided in two. So that's a complex little texture right there. Pizzicatos down here, harp. Up here I have in blue anything to do with tempo or meter, I mark in blue. 6/8. There are 6/8 notes in this measure, right? So usually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the next bar is a 3/4. And you can see I've done a triangle for 3/4, which is pretty standard. Just what you see actually in a 3/4 beating pattern. The next bar is a little different. It's 5/8. So instead of 6/8, you now have 5/8 notes in the bar. Of course, 3/4 has got 6/8 notes in the bar as well. They're just organized differently, right? This is where meter, the idea of meter having having a distinct grouping of notes is important. The 5/8, so it's 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can organize that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In this case, it's the big beat first, which you can see I actually written a big line down. That's my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It tells me when I look at this, if I'm just glancing at it, that that's going to be a big beat first, representing 1, 2, 3, and then a smaller beat, 4, 5. Okay, and that's mixed, a kind of mixed meter section. And it goes on. You can see lots of different markings for that: 3, 4, 5, 8, 7, 8. So those are blue for tempo and meter, red for entrances, anything special that I need to just focus on, maybe the line itself, who's playing what. That's kind of it. I will also use sometimes pencil just for notations, little annotations. Step 1 of the process is that it's getting to know the score. You've got to know the score. Another famous saying is have the score in your head, not your head in the score. As a conductor, you need to be able to connect with your players, and if you got your head stuck in a score and you're not quite sure what's coming next, and we've all been guilty of it in certain contexts, but depending on what happens, and sometimes you're throwing things and you're just like, oh my god, here I go. That's happened to me on several occasions, and I just have to do it in the moment, and you can, but ideally you need to have the score here. You have a very clear sense of who's coming next and where's the line and what's the tempo, and that's, you try to memorize it as much as possible. You can conduct from memory, and I do it at times. Just leave the score aside and just have it all inside your head, and it's a very intimate way of working with an orchestra because you're completely at their disposal. And that takes me to part 2, which of course is the rehearsal process. So part 1's preparation, part 2's rehearsal process. And that is where things get thrashed out. And if you went to a rehearsal, if you're not familiar with orchestras or rehearsal techniques, if you went to a rehearsal, you will just see skill-based solution finding. You're going to see nuts and bolts. There's no, maybe there's some magic, but it's just about making the trains run on time. Is that short? Is that long? What's the tempo? Is it loud? Is it soft? The parameters of music is what we work with, and it's you would recognize it as being a very skill-based process. And of course, intonation. Is it sharp? Is it flat? Where are you in relation to other people? All sorts of fascinating concepts by themselves, but that is what the rehearsal is really about, and it's putting it all together, sewing it together, fixing little bits, focusing on the microscopic, and then whoom, exploding out to the bigger picture, and that constant process of moving back and forwards between those two things. So that's the rehearsal process. It's it. I may talk more about that in a later video about the idea of rehearsal, because it's such a fascinating place. It's where the work gets done, and it's where the relationships between the players really shines, and how they interact and how they solve problems, and what the conductor's role there is to help to get to, the performance that everyone wants. My personal view is the conductor should be there to help draw out of players the best performance they can get. Be there as a support, as an encouragement, and as a resource for them. What do they need? Do they actually need me to give them that cue? Do they need more direction? Do I need to be clearer in how I beat for that moment, or whatever it happens to be? What is the need at this current point? And that is the interesting stuff. So that's kind of my philosophical view of the conductor in rehearsal. In performance, that's of course the icing on the cake, but it's very much the tip of the iceberg of what has been going on to get to that point. This is where we're all ready to go. Everyone should have the music in their heads, and everyone else's music in their heads. They know what's going on where. Frankly, as a conductor, you can hopefully relax a little bit more. You don't need to focus now on fixing problems, because it's going to be in time and off we go. There's the start and there's the end, and you're just going to play it and you're not going to stop. Fingers crossed. So that's the moment where the conductor can relax, I hope, a little bit more, and the players can feel more free as well. They can start to express themselves and give their 100% to the performance, to get this piece off the stage and into the auditorium, into the ears and the minds and the souls and the hearts of our audience. That's the performance. That's what happens there. And the conductor, as I say, can be a little more macroscopic, sitting on top of all, guiding things. This is where this happens. This is where this happens. Don't panic if something goes wrong, because things always go wrong. Just figure out a way to fix it and move on. Give people encouragement. That's the performance. 3-stage process. Just a little bit more on the role of the conductor. I'm going to do another one of these videos, I think, on conducting next time. I'm actually going to talk about what a conductor does, the technique of conducting. I'm going to talk about these things. Yeah, all of them. These are all my toys. I've collected so many over the years. In fact, right now I only use one. It's this one. But I have all these. I'm going to talk about these in the next video. But just one more thought about the role of the conductor, and that's really the idea that the conductor is also an advocate for the musicians. You should always have your musicians in mind. You should have their backs. And in a time like this, I'm very conscious of the fact that many musicians are really hurting and suffering. They have no work. It's a precarious life as it is, and in today's crisis, there are people who are hurting. So I miss my orchestra, I miss my musicians, and I miss those interactions. And I'm thinking a lot about you guys. I'm thinking about how to support you and how to get ourselves up and running as soon as possible whenever we get past all of this. And I hope to see you all very, very soon. So I will do a follow-up to this on Sunday. I'll talk a little bit more about what the conductor does, actually, technique. And I might do a few conducting lessons. I might drag my kids in here and do a little more fun thing. So please tune in on Sunday for that. And until then, please stay well, stay safe, stay healthy, look after each other. And